Hi, Emily Summers here with my presentation on attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Just some basic background information I came across while doing my research is that the symptoms of ADHD was first mentioned and recorded of similar cases in 1902. And basically from the time of 1902 until 1980, it was just basically classified as boys who were naughty, misbehaved, too much energy, and was kind of what they were categorized as. It wasn't until 1980 that it was given a name, which at that time was ADD, attention deficit disorder. ADHD has nothing to do with an IQ, your IQ, or intelligence. It's basically a set of problems with a wide range of characteristics. So there are quite a few set of problems, but they present themselves in a wide variety. Problems or issues that we all have is what ADHD is. It's just those with ADHD experience them more and can't process them the same way. And ADHD, those symptoms and those characteristics, they are not under voluntary control. They don't have control over that. The prevalence of ADHD in the United States in 2011, there was recorded 11% of students between the ages of 4 and 17 years of age that were diagnosed and or being served for ADHD in the classroom. And that's approximately 6.4 million. Now, 2011 seems kind of far or old facts, but that means we should be expecting some new data here shortly because it usually is about 5 years or so. As we talk about the prevalence of ADHD in the United States, we do see an increased upward trend. Since 2003, we've seen an increased number. You can see in the picture here, excuse me, in the map, that there's what states are being served and what percentages. Some of recorded ideas or reasons to the increased trend of ADHD is that the criteria of diagnosing ADHD has changed and is also continually changing. So as new symptoms arise and new ways to treat, the way that we diagnose changes as well. So we went from having maybe a very narrow scope of diagnosing ADHD to now we have a wide scope where we can look at different criteria. A lot of it is parent reported, so it may not all be medically reported data that we're receiving. It's parent reported saying, yeah, my kid has ADHD. And then medications, as medications change and we get longer lasting medications, more medications are created, more options, then there is more students who are being treated because before maybe when the treatment didn't fit their diagnosis, they weren't being treated. But as medications have came and been able to fit different diagnoses, more children are being treated. Some difficulties that students with ADHD have is slowing down and speeding up. So for example, when we tell them to slow down, you're moving too fast, take your time, whether it's on an assignment or walking in the hallway even, it's something that they have a hard time doing is slowing their body and their mind down. In the same way, it can be the opposite effect of speeding up. So a student could have a really hard time getting started on their daily tasks in their classroom, and they're moving particularly slow, changing their shoes for PE, and it's just something that is very slow for them, and they just can't speed up. It's not anything that they can do faster. Listening, focusing, and reading and retaining. So when they read, retaining what they have is difficult for them. They may read something and understand it and get 2 pages further and then forget what they read and know that they read through all that and have no recollection. Just listening and staying focused is a difficulty as well. Staying on task. So when given a task, it is hard for them to stay on task. And then getting and staying organized is something that they struggle with as well. Something I was unaware of or didn't actually think about, but once I read it and found some research on it, it makes complete sense that many students with ADHD struggle with going to sleep at night. It is almost impossible for them to turn their brain off. They have to completely mentally exhaust themselves, and some of them physically exhaust themselves to be able to fall asleep. And on the flip side of that, can have an incredibly hard time waking up. So in the morning, it is just they mentally, physically cannot get themselves out of bed, get themselves going. Another difficulty they have is sitting still. A student or a child with ADHD really struggles to just sit and listen, and being still in general, standing in line in the lunchroom, sitting in the lunchroom, in line in the hallway, all of that is difficult for them. Prioritizing and time management is difficult as well. Just as starting tasks and completing tasks is another issue they have. Students with ADHD also have a hard time getting ideas down. So they have so many ideas going on in their head, it is hard to just grasp them and get them down, pen to paper. And then managing emotions are also difficult for them. Excuse me. Some characteristics of ADHD is what I learned is one is called drifting. So they may be working on a task and then they drift to looking out the window, and then they drift over to talking to their neighbor and just going from one thing to the next, and they are unable to remember what they had started in the first place, the assignment they were on. They just drift from one thing to another. Most students are able to push out distractions. So we may hear a noise behind us and turn real quick and look and then move on. Students with ADHD will hear a pencil drop or hear a sound. They have no control over the fact that they need to look at it. They need to see where it is. They need to see who it happened to, where it went, where it is now. It continues to snowball. They're unable to just push that distraction out. Some worry often. So an example that I heard while researching is it can be something like they're going to school and they start thinking about, what if I left my lunch at home? Leaving up my lunch at home then turns into me not having food for lunch. And then if I don't have food for lunch, that means I don't eat. And then I'm not hungry, or then I'm hungry all day. And then if this is something that happens every day, then I'm not going to eat anymore. And everything just kind of piles and snowballs into this extreme worry that they didn't need to have in the first place. Trouble with their working memory. So meaning that they start a task or a project and maybe they have to go get something for that project or that task, downstairs or in another room. And while in that other room or downstairs, they lose focus and see something else and they start project number 2 and then completely forget that they were even on project number 1 and they are knee deep in project number 2. So their focus and their memory of what they're doing works differently. Talking out of turn and interrupting is a characteristic. There's just, as the next one says, there's no impulse control. It's very hard for them to just be able to hold that in. They just want to blurt it out. The thought comes to their mind, they've got to say it. There's no, I need to wait, I need to be called on. It's just all at once. The effect on learning and participation in the classroom for students with ADHD, staying tuned in is a effect that they have, that these students have, is that it's difficult for them to be tuned into what the teacher may be teaching at that time. I've heard that it was described as having like 4 or 5 stations on, TV stations on at the same time, and trying to tune out the other 4 and listen to the 5th one. It's very difficult for them. And so being able to be involved in that task when they're having such a hard time even tuning out the others is almost impossible. Memory issues, the raising hand example. The teacher may ask for an example or an answer to a question, and a student with ADHD will immediately raise their hand because they have an absolutely perfect answer, but they call on Sally first. The teacher calls on Sally first. Sally answers, and then they call on the student with ADHD, and the student has literally completely forgot the answer they came up with. So they just have to say, oh, I forgot. Even though they had a perfectly good answer, their memory just does not retain as quickly, excuse me, or as long as other students who can sit there and wait their turn. Some students with ADHD have negative behaviors, and so those behaviors then affect their ability to be in the classroom. There's a lot of negative behaviors that can come into effect and then cause them to be pulled out of the classroom. So interrupting others, not working well with others, working too fast, working too slow, calling out of turn, leaving their seat all the time, things like that. Sorry. Incapable of pushing out distractions, that's what I talked about before. If they're unable to push out the normal distractions that the rest of us can, especially in a classroom of 25 students, it's very hard for them to learn. It's very hard for them to participate. Here versus there, meaning that in some places, their ADHD may not be as bad. And then in other places, depending on the situation and circumstances, it can be the complete opposite and extremely difficult for them. Staying organized obviously is going to affect them in the classroom. Being able to know that, I have this to do and this to do, and this needs to be completed before this, and I need to finish this before I can do this. So staying organized, and that comes even with their personal belongings as well. Getting started and staying motivated affects them in the classroom, getting their ideas down like I mentioned before. And then because of their sleep patterns, they could be falling asleep in class, or they could be the opposite, almost manic. They've had so much sleep, they've got so much energy. Not all students experience the same issues in the same ways. Everything I found showed examples of how they may have similar issues, but it affects them differently. A lot of that can be emotional control. It's not all or nothing type situation for students with ADHD, and that everyone has these issues like I talked about before. I have them and I don't have ADHD, but because the ADHD, they experience them more frequently and it causes them to go through them differently. IDEA 2004 categorized ADHD under other health impairments. ADHD in the classroom, way we can kind of help with that is preferential seating, putting them in places where they can be, can be helped and maintain focus. So maybe at the front of the room for some students, the back of the room for the others. Providing fidget tools for everyone, maybe a binner basket of, Rubik's Cubes, some squishy balls, some seat wedges, tennis balls for chairs, but making those available to everybody so that the student does not feel singled out. Checklists are great for all students as well, especially those with ADHD. Do you have this done, have you brought this back from home, etc. Utilizing graphic organizers are great for them to get their ideas down on paper when they forget and lose focus. The graphic organizer tells them what they're doing and keeps them on task. Having an agenda, an organizer that the school provides or the grade provides, that they're writing down what they did during the day and what needs to be done, taking it home and bringing it back. And then directions written on the board, being able to see it is important, but also administering those in chunks. So saying, first I need you to do this. After you finish this, then we're going to move on to this. Chunking them really helps students with ADHD focus and be able to complete more tasks. And those are my references. I really enjoyed this research, and I really feel like it will help me as I move on through school and into teaching. Thank you so much.